bylaws which make it difficult for township businesses to grow. The Premier and Economic Development MEC, Lebogang Maile, hosted a dialogue with township entrepreneurs earlier today. To share some light on what took place at the dialogue, we are joined by Saki Zamxaka. He is the CEO of Gauteng Growth and Development Agency. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Toby.
Now, briefly tell us, what's the purpose of hosting a dialogue such as this based on township entrepreneurship?
Firstly, is to understand what are the challenges that they face and what can be done. As you know, the Gauteng province has prioritized transforming the economy and focusing on the townships, because historically they just have been places where people live, but you need to have them as places where people live, work and play, and they have social services, but most importantly business. So the idea with this dialogue is to see what their challenges are, what can be done to promote those businesses.
Now, speaking of promotion, I mean, in order to go forward with anything, you need policies in place and laws in place that ensure that happens. Now, let's look at these bylaws that the Premier was speaking of, saying that these are the bylaws that make it difficult for township entrepreneurs to thrive. What exactly was he speaking of?
There are various things. Firstly, for you to operate a business, you need to have land zoned commercial, because for it to be zoned commercial, it may mean that more bulk services are required. There's going to be noise, there's going to be more traffic, there's going to be complaints by neighbors and all of that. So if you have townships which have traditionally just been residential, to get it zoned commercial presents its own challenges. You may have objections, you may have people not supporting it, but again, some of the businesses, because they've been there for a long time, they actually complement the social life in townships. So you need a bit of flexibility in accommodating businesses that are in those areas than you would in a certain area, for example, where you're in Sandhurst and somebody says, I don't want a business on my doorstep. So it's those kinds of things that you need to look at and say, how do you adjust for realities that exist now, but also maybe readjust the laws to allow those people who want to do businesses in the townships.
Let's look at bureaucracy and red tape. I mean, this is something that entrepreneurs in general struggle with. What are some of the measures that are there to ensure that township entrepreneurs are able to navigate their way through the red tape that exists?
The red tape will be, and support is in different areas. Some of the big things in business, Tabi, whether you're in township or not in a township, is market access and access to finance. And you can't give any support to any form of business without doing that. So government has said one of the ways to create markets for these businesses is to put aside a certain percentage of government work that it must be procured from township businesses and then gets monitored every month. So every MEC gets monitored on how much money is spent on township businesses every month. We have in the province entities like the Enterprise Propeller, which finance small businesses, and there are other agencies which are national agencies and operate here in the province. So financing and market access is one of those, and as you say, policies. So part of policy announcements would be those on pay small businesses on time, procure a certain percentage from those businesses, and what can we do to help with industrialization as well. So recently we're talking to the capital equipment manufacturers, and they're saying government spends a lot of money on capital equipment, but there's no regulation that says local procurement. Is it possible to have a portion of it that is locally procured? Of course, you have to balance that with price, that you encourage that the entrepreneurs are also price competitive, because if you're going to have prices 20% more expensive than imported goods, you could be pricing in inefficiencies in the market, but at the same time, creation of jobs and promotion of these businesses is important, but the balance has always to be maintained.
Now, just to pick up on what you said about access to finance, I mean, that remains a huge issue, especially for township entrepreneurs. Let's look at the balance between, trying to assist township entrepreneurs and businesses in general, and also ensuring that their ideas are bankable? Because that's always an issue. If an entrepreneur goes to a bank, the bank would generally decline because they say the idea isn't bankable. So how does, the Gauteng government plan to balance that out, where you say, yes, we want to assist, but the ideas have to be ideas that you can sell and actually make money from?
Part of the support the Enterprise Propeller gives is actually business readiness. So they will help an entrepreneur do a business plan. They will help with some limited feasibility, and that gives a sense of whether or not the idea is feasible first. And then you can deal with the other risks of market access, whether the person has the skills enough and all of that. But first, putting together a proper business plan that looks at the feasibility of the idea is part of the support that's done.
Now, there's also the issue of public-private partnership. Let's look at the importance here of that, and also maybe a few examples of that you can give us in terms of this specific initiative.
We can look at public-private partnerships in different ways, and the easiest one is that government enables, puts an environment and lets businesses do what they need to do. Today, as part of the shining examples of a township business, was Busy Corner. So the Premier visited with the MECs and had lunch at Busy Corner. It's one of the most popular Shisanyama spots in the country. Again, government then didn't do much. It's a business that got given a license to trade in liquor, to trade as a business, and it is thriving. What you could then do as a business is to encourage them to be involved in other areas in the value chain. It could either be financing or them supplying somebody with meat, and you increase their turnover. The other one is where government then enters into formal partnerships. Let's say a government building needs to be built in a township, and you partner with a local entrepreneur to build a home affairs office. So you use their land, they become a developer. So it's different models that you can use on what government already needs, because as you try and bring services closer to where people live, you don't want those properties ideally to only be owned by big funds, property funds. You could empower people in townships to own those properties and actually earn income out of it. So there's various models you can use to support.
Let's now look at this collaboration between the Gauteng Investment Centre as well as the Department of Trade and Industry. We know that they're starting the Trade Invest Africa Roadshow tomorrow. Can you tell us more about that and its significance?
This is an initiative which was launched by the Minister of Trade and Industry in July, called Trade Invest Africa. And the main thing really is to promote exports by South African businesses, primarily to the rest of Africa, but also to the rest of the world. We're looking at the continent, one, because we see it as the next growth area, but also logistics are much easier. If you look at the Southern African region, it's already one of the biggest destinations of locally produced products from South Africa. So it's a natural step for South Africa, but a lot of businesses again battle with some form of support, and this initiative looks at giving that support, and it's in mainly three key areas. One is financial support, which may be export insurances that you need. The other one is market access, which may be in the form of negotiating trade agreements, bilateral or multilateral, with these new markets. And the other one is non-financial support, which could be the trade missions that government does. So really this is a way of government saying part of improving local production and increasing employment is looking at new markets for South African businesses.
Now, speaking of trading within the continent, how are other African markets receiving our products? Are they generally supportive of it, or are some of the economic struggles that African countries are seeing at this point in time hindering our ability to export our goods?
Well, I mean, most of the continent faces a lot of challenges of economic growth because of the softening of prices on commodities, but you have some places in the continent which are not so much resource dominant. I mean, we're seeing Tanzania expected to grow at more than 7%. I think Kenya is about 5-6%. Cote d'Ivoire, I think, is about 7-8%. So there are some areas in the continent where the sentiment is changing and growth is a bit high. But even in those where growth is not that big, there still is consumption. They still import products from South Africa and the rest of the continent and the rest of the world. But I think what's also important for South African businesses as they grow and export into the continent is to remember that what we want for South Africa is what other countries want for themselves as well. So localization becomes important, that as you open up a new business, look at what you can localize in that area, what can you source from country X, so that you don't 100% import from South Africa. And that balanced development gets to be fair. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you will then eventually have countries introducing laws that force localization.
I guess a good way to wrap up would be to look at the next step for entrepreneurs, what entrepreneurs should be looking at, especially when it comes to innovation. I'm actually glad you mentioned some of the African countries that are doing well. Kenya as an example. Innovation is really big there. Government invests in innovation. Maybe a first question would be, how do you see South African entrepreneurs faring out in terms of being innovative, and also what can they do to make sure that innovation is increased but also supported?
Well, I think South Africa is still fairly innovative in certain areas. We have the Innovation Hub in Pretoria, where we support entrepreneurs in the ICT and tech environment. But I think one of the things that often kills innovation is comfort, where there's no pressure. Well, we have a banking system that works, why should we innovate? We have Wi-Fi, why should we innovate? So I think the more the markets are open and there's competition, it drives a little bit of innovation. As South African businesses get outside of South Africa, they'll get out of their comfort zone, find new competition, but also have to respond to new markets and new demands. So I think these opportunities could well be a driver for this innovation, because for some of the products, South Africa may also not be a big enough market for them. So innovation is what's going to determine whether we succeed in this drive to export and whether we remain competitive.
Saki, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for an insightful discussion.
Thank you.
That was Saki Zamxaka, CEO of Gauteng Growth and Development Agency. He was talking to us about some of the initiatives by the Gauteng government to boost business and job opportunities in the province. We'll have